Good evening, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen. It is with immense pleasure that I welcome you all this evening. I must appreciate the fact that you have decided to grace this important occasion while adhering to COVID prevention norms. The Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine was founded in this very hall on the 16th of March in 2016 with 67 founder members, and it is the brainchild of Dr. Vasantha Disanayake and the current president himself, Professor Tilak Jayalath. The college started as the Sri Lankan Society of Internal Medicine, but within just 2 years, it was upgraded to the Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine due to the dedication and perseverance of these esteemed members. 2021 celebrates the 4th year of its continuous success and progress. We are gathered here to witness the inauguration ceremony of the annual Congress of the Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the formal proceeding is about to commence, and may I kindly request you all to stand up when the ceremonial procession enters the hall, and please remain standing for the national anthem and the traditional lighting of the oil lamp. Thank you. Please remain standing for the national anthem.
Lanka
Thank you. Now, may I respectfully invite the following dignitaries to light the oil lamp. President of the Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine, Professor Tilak Jayalath. Our chief guest, Professor Saroj Jayasinghe. The Vice Chancellor to our University of Peradeniya, Professor Upul Disanayake. Dean of the Faculty of Medicine, Professor Asiri Abegunawardena. President-elect Dr. Harsha Satish Chandra, immediate past President and the orator Professor Tilak Veeraratne, Founder President Dr. Vasantha Disanayake, Congress Chair Dr. Suranga Manilgama, Vice President Dr. Shyamali Abegunawardena, Treasurer of the College Dr. Kumudini Jayasinghe, distinguished guest Professor Ilanga Sekara, and the secretaries of the college, Professor Manoji Patirage and Dr. Amara Vitar. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, you may now take your seats. Now, may I kindly invite Professor Tilak Jayalath, Professor Saroj Jayasinghe, Professor Tilak Veeraratne, Dr. Suranga Manilgama, Professor Manoji Patirage, and Dr. Amara Vittarana to take their seats at the head table. Thank you. The President of the College of Internal Medicine, Professor Tilak Jayalath, will now deliver the welcome address. Thank you.
Good evening. The chief guest, Professor Saroj Jayasinghe and Mrs. Jayasinghe, T. Varugunam orator, Professor Tilak Veeraratne, Vice Chancellor, University of Peradeniya, Professor Buldisanayake, Dean, Faculty of Medicine, Peradeniya, Professor Asiri Abegunwadana, Council members, members of Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's with great pleasure and pride and happiness I stand here to make this welcome address. Let me first warmly welcome our chief guest, Professor Saroj Jayasinghe, former chair and Professor of Medicine, Department of Medical Humanities, University of Colombo. I would like to extend a special welcome to Professor Jacqueline Winfield Fincher, President of American College of Physicians, and Dr. Henry Rajaratnam, Senior Consultant Physician, for gracing SimCon 2020 as guest of honors. It's my pleasure to welcome Professor T. Varugunam Memorial Orator, Professor Tilak Veeraratne, Professor of Medicine, University of Pune. I extend a special welcome to Professor Buldisanayake, Vice Chancellor, University of Peradeniya, and Professor Asiri Abegunwadana, Dean, Faculty of Medicine, Peradeniya. I warmly welcome speakers, chairpersons, members of Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine, country heads and representatives of the pharmaceutical companies, and other invited guests to SimCon 2020. I wish to thank every one of you for attending this inauguration ceremony of SimCon 2020 despite the restrictions imposed due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. The year 2020 has been one of the most challenging years for all organizations due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Our college was no exception. In the battle against COVID-19, specialists in internal medicine have been in the forefront, at times compromising their own safety and health. The importance of holistic and compassionate care has never been more emphasized, and the role played by the specialists in internal medicine in this regard has been truly exemplary. I'm happy that specialists in internal medicine were able to deliver the expected care, especially in the battle against COVID-19, mainly due to the support and the guidance given by the Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine. There was no organization exclusively for specialist physicians in internal medicine in our country till Sri Lankan Society of Internal Medicine was established on March 16, 2016. I was inducted in the same place as the fourth president of our college exactly 1 year ago. We were not able to carry out many of activities of the new council due to the restriction of movement during the pandemic and the heavy enrollment of our members in this battle against COVID-19. At the beginning of the pandemic in March 2020, there was a severe shortage of personal protective equipment. As a college, we had to work tirelessly to provide PPEs to our members, mainly with the support of the pharmaceutical industry. This is how we distributed PPEs to our members island-wide. There was a severe shortage of N95 masks during the first wave of the pandemic. We managed to import N95 masks directly from China and distribute it among our membership free of charge. As a college, we were actively involved in educating general public on COVID-19 pandemic. The first TV live program was on Rupavahini, and there was another discussion on Dharana TV and on ITN as well. We distributed mobile phones among our members in several provinces and shared these numbers in social media. The purpose was to answer questions related to COVID-19 pandemic. The college arranged webinars on COVID-19 pandemic and other common diseases despite having restrictions. The first one was on current approach towards patient care through an expert view during COVID-19. A large number of leptospirosis cases were reported from various parts of our country, and we had to address this issue during this pandemic. So we arranged emerging burden of leptospirosis in the context of COVID pandemic, and that was well attended and well received. Management of patients with fever and leptospirosis during the COVID pandemic was discussed in collaboration with Clinical Society of Martale and webinar on non-COVID medical conditions, and this was on liver diseases. And we arranged a webinar on how to engage in a webinar effectively. We had a speaker from Pakistan. Then there was another one. This was the most received and well-attended webinar, a webinar on diagnosis, transmission, pathogenesis, and prevention by Professor Malik Piris, the world-renowned figure, and that was well received by the membership, and there was a very high attendance. Then there was another webinar on dyslipidemia, an update on hypertension. A different type of webinar for school teachers in southern province was arranged to encourage teachers to go to school taking all precautions. And we were very lucky that to arrange this webinar on vaccine on the day launch of vaccines in our country on 28th of January. And this was well received, and there was a large number of attendants. Then the Ceylon College of Physicians, the first lecture was given to us, and our member, Dr. Bandusiri Ratnayaka, he delivered the first lecture in CCP. Despite restrictions due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the southern chapter of our college managed to arrange some educational programs. This is the Peer Learning Forum on Respiratory Diseases. Then there was another one on hypertension and dyslipidemia. The regional education program on thyroid update. And we gave the opportunity to our general membership to interact with the experts on COVID-19 pandemic. We invited Dr. Ananda Vijay Professor Kamini Mendis, and Professor Neelika Malavige, and our membership had the opportunity to interact with these experts. And we arranged 3 workshops during this pandemic in Kandy Hospital on early warning signs, ultrasound scan for medical officers, and echocardiogram. And despite the pandemic and restrictions, some of our college members, they studied the clinical and epidemiological characteristics and outcome of patients with COVID-19. And this study has been already published in Research Square Journal. At the moment, there is another study going on side effects of COVID-19 vaccination among healthcare workers in selected hospitals. And this e-learning module with Ceylon College of Physicians and University of Colombo was arranged by some of our members. Then we prepared e-leaflets on prevention of COVID-19 infection, and this was shared in social media in 3 languages. Members of our Southern chapter prepared these video clips on COVID-19 pandemic covering all aspects: prevention, symptoms, and treatment. So they covered all aspects of COVID-19 pandemic. On 11th of this month, 2 weeks back, we are very lucky that we were able to sign the MOU with the PGIM regarding the SLCIM office actually. And we plan to occupy this place probably in few weeks' time. And this is how the office will look like in few weeks' time. One of the dreams that we had at the beginning of our council. And this SLCIM app is now ready to be installed. And this will be officially introduced before the oration today. And you can install this app now in the Play Store as well as App Store. And this has all the details about our college. I wish to thank Ms. Saman Disanayak and Mr. Dishan Fernando for taking a great trouble to prepare this app for our college. SLCM works very closely with the Ministry of Health and attends meetings regularly. We participate in COVID-19 Clinical Management Committee meetings at the Ministry of Health as a professional organization. We made a huge contribution to the revised case definition, management of patients in different healthcare settings, and risk assessment of healthcare workers. We have reached the most crucial juncture in our life as the frontline runners in the battle against COVID-19 pandemic. The challenge is huge, considering the high infectivity, the lack of definitive treatment, and facilities. Despite facing the challenge, my council made a great contribution to what I presented today and SIMCON 20. This is my council. I wish to thank these 3 colleagues for helping me in numerous ways, especially when I'm in crisis, addressing some issues in Colombo and Southern chapter. I want to thank Dr. Harsha Satish Chandra, Dr. Priyamali Jayasekar, and Dr. Gandak Sianaratna. Without the contribution of these 6 colleagues, SIMCON 20 would have been only a dream. I have no words to appreciate and thank Dr. Suranga Manilgama, Professor Manoji Patirage, Dr. Amara Vitarana, Dr. Shamali Abegunwadana, Dr. Kumudini Jayasingh, and Dr. Madhuvanti Hettiarchi for their great contribution to my success during this period. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Suranga Manilgama, the Congress chairperson, will address the gathering now.
Ladies and gentlemen, here we meet again at the birthplace of our college. When our president asked me to take the challenge of organizing the Congress, I was not sure whether we could see an end to the COVID crisis. We had drawn initial plans to have it last year that got stalled due to the unpredictable nature of the pandemic. However, here we are feeling nostalgic and cherishing the 4th Congress that celebrates the beauty of internal medicine. We have crafted this mixture of great minds to set standards for holistic care. They all have thrived in the great sea of wisdom and shown us the boundless possibilities that are limited only by your scope of imagination. The annual Congress is the pinnacle of academic activities in the college calendar. SimCon 2020 will be held from 24th to 26th February 2021 at Hotel Grand Canyon, Kandy. As frontline clinicians, we entered the hornet's nest in managing COVID-19 pandemic throughout the year 2020. This year, we pledge to give you a wonderful academic accolade through this Congress. SimCon 2020 would be a novel experience for members of the Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine, featuring a hybrid conference linking virtual and physical presence through latest technology. According to Michael John Babak, all progress takes place outside the comfort zone. We saw our members doing just that during last year. Therefore, we selected the theme, devotion and diligence through courage, that is incomparable. 3 pre-Congress workshops were held since morning. I hope workshop for registrars on how to pass MD medicine, which is an integral part of SimCon since its inception, and workshop for senior registrars on getting ready for overseas training definitely have immensely benefited the postgraduate students. The workshop on non-invasive ventilation conducted by the expert in the field was beneficial for both specialists and trainees. The academic program spans over 2 days with plenaries, symposia, guest lectures, oration, expert discussions, and grand word rounds. The faculty includes over 50 speakers, both local and international, including a delegation from the American College of Physicians from USA, United Kingdom, Australia, and India. I appreciate the help given by Marisa McCarran from American College of Physicians in organizing this collaborative effort. Renowned faculty will focus on empowering internal medicine specialists in the field of metabolic, tropical, geriatric, cardiovascular, neurological, and respiratory medicine. There will be also be Veterans File, a novel concept to discuss the clinical conundrums by sharing the memorable experience of veterans in the medical fraternity. The scientific papers have been given more prominence. Each day will commence with oral presentations and midday poster presentations, which will enable the researchers to present their work to a wider audience. A special addition to this session is grand word rounds, which will unravel the mysteries and showcase the healing power of the specialist in internal medicine. Finale would be a brain teaser with SimCon quiz. All these will be in addition to T. Varaganam oration, which you will witness in a little while by our immediate past president. It will give a head start to the academic lineup. All this massive effort is for you to change the course of healing human beings with this rapidly evolving, complex global health. The change will happen. Let us dive in the words of late Steve Jobs. If you really look closely, most overnight successes took a long time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I cordially invite Professor Tilak Jayalath to introduce the guest of honor for tonight, Dr. Henry Rajaratnam. Due to COVID restrictions, he is unable to attend in person, and his speech will be delivered via a recording. forgive me, we will not be airing the recording. Therefore, I would like to move on to the next part of tonight's proceedings. The recording will go on. Oh, all right, sorry. The recording will go on. So, shall we?
Professor Tilak Jayalath, President of the Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine, Professor Jacqueline Winifred Fincom, President of the American College of Physicians, members of the Council, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I count it a great privilege to have been invited to be the guest of honor at this your annual academic sessions of 2021. I thought it would be appropriate for me to talk about the profile of a physician. This lecture is drawn from my own personal experience and thoughts. The first profile is the principles of practice. We as physicians, we are expected to cure all the patients who come to us. But this is far from the reality. Our motto could be, we cure sometimes, we relieve often, but we comfort always. In addition to these three aspects, I would like to speak about prevention. Prevention. That is a cardinal aspect of a life of a physician. We know prevention can be primary, where we are trying to prevent the onset of a disease. It could be secondary, where the disease has already occurred and we are trying to prevent the onset of complications. It can be tertiary, where complications have already occurred, but we are trying to prevent the aggravation of the complications. To this must be added primordial prevention. By this I mean that we should be able, or we should endeavor to prevent diseases in the next generation. For example, if a diabetic lady presents herself to my clinic, and on my interrogation of her family history, if she says that she has a family history of diabetes, and if she is not married, I will tell her in no uncertain terms that she must get her diabetes under control even before considering pregnancy. If a lady presents herself to me and tells me that one of her parents or both have diabetes, I would be very, very careful about her pre-pregnancy preparations and pre-marital preparations. I would go so far as to advise the parents that before they think of other things such as property, prestige, jobs, and so on, that they think of whether there is a history of diabetes in the proposed family. If that is so, I would say that I would ask them to avoid, if possible, such an engagement. That we would call primordial prevention, because we are trying to prevent the progeny in the next generation from developing diabetes. Similarly, if a young lady who is mildly obese presents herself to me, I would tell her to get her weight down before she gets married or become pregnant, and to remain at the ideal weight pre-pregnancy, during pregnancy, and thereafter, to prevent the onset of obesity, diabetes, hypertension in the progeny. And the lady herself may develop these complications during her pregnancy. So that's an example of primordial prevention. The second feature of a physician is that he always remains a pedagogue. Pedagogue means he's a teacher. Now he can teach all sorts of people. We are referring here mainly to medicine. He can teach medical students, he can teach nursing staff, he can teach trainee specialists, he can give lectures to specialists, and he can teach and teach and teach. There is no end to his teaching career. By teaching a single patient, the patient will carry that knowledge to one or two others. When he teaches a medical student, then that will go on to all those medical students, patients in the future. And if you teach a physician, by whatever means, then it will benefit thousands and thousands of their patients. So teaching is a very important aspect of being a physician. May I at this time tell you an anecdotal story. I was appointed to the General Hospital Kandy as soon as I came back from the UK in 1973. The professor of medicine at that time was your founder patron of the Ceylon College of Internal Medicine, Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine, Professor Vargun. And he came to me and said, "Henry, you have just returned from England. There are some young doctors who want to sit for that MD medicine. Could you take them under your wing and coach them, please?" I said, "Of course I will do so." I took those 7 students and coached them. They were exemplary students, and I was not surprised at all that they came out with flying colors in the exam. Many years later, in 1996, when I was president of the College of Physicians, I was invited to Australia, and there I was invited for a meal with one of the friends of my wife. He was one of those 7 students who underwent the coaching in Kandy. And he reminded me of those coaching classes. And he said, "Sir, do you know what happened to those 7 students that you taught?" I said, I know vaguely, but I am not sure of the details. "Sir, one of those students became the founding professor of medicine at the University of Jaffna. The second student, sir, became the founding professor of medicine at the University of Karapitiya. Then there were two others who were successful. One is a physician in England and one is a physician. I am a physician here in Melbourne. The last two became professors of medicine in Peradeniya and professor in Peradeniya. So you may be familiar with some of them. But that is the outcome of a bout of good teaching which I thought I gave them. And I was surprised that it ended up any physician can be proud of. There's another case where I had a little grandchild of one of my helpers, and he had to go undergo neurosurgery many times to remove shrapnel in his brain as a result of the last days of the war. He underwent a ventriculoperitoneal shunt, and it functioned very well for about 9 years. But last year it started giving trouble, and he had about 17 surgical interventions. At last, they managed to do a ventricular jugular shunt. And the neurosurgeon who did that visited Colombo, and he gave me a phone call. And he said, "Sir, you are interested in this young chap. I am the neurosurgeon, but I want you to tell you an interesting story. I did my first clinical appointment under you, and you had an exam at the end of the 2 months of clerking. And I got a neurological case, and you failed me. And you repeated me that your neurological examination was poor, and I had to repeat that 2 weeks. But today, I am a neurosurgeon operating on those cases where an operation is necessary for the nervous system." So that opened my eyes, and I thought, wow, sometimes you don't make correct judgments of your students. They turn out to be fantastic people in the future. So that is about pedagogy. The third is the life of a physician. He should publish. The adage, publish or perish, is there in physicians in the USA. Publishing is a privilege. And in the days when I passed out as a doctor, it was so difficult to publish. We had to go to the library, only one library, and look at the Index Medicus and go through all the articles that were published in the world for the year and see whether the subject of interest has been reported. And I just want to tell you that I want to just tell you about one of my failures. I was post-intern at Wallace Muller, and I detected 13 cases of scrub typhus. And I wrote up a paper and presented it at the SLMA annual scientific sessions. But then I wanted to write it up, and I wrote it up and sent it to the Ceylon Medical Journal. The editor replied that I have not reported on the so-called 373 cases of scrub typhus, which was reported during World War II from Embolipitia. So I scoured all the journals of the world and could find no reference. I asked the people at the MRI who had taken part in that study of the East African Corps during World War II, stationed at Embolipitia, who came down with scrub typhus. And they told me, yes, we did the studies. Professor Audi took control of it, but we never heard of it thereafter. So I had to give up the idea of publication because I couldn't find that reference that the editors wanted. About 20 years later, one day I received the journal of the Royal Society of Medicine. And in it, there was an article on typhus. I looked at the author, and he was one Dr. Robert Brown. He was the senior medical officer of the British Army. Immediately, I wrote a letter to him and said, this is what happened during World War II. Your soldiers came down with scrub typhus. Do you have any reference to them? And a month later, I received a reply, yes, we have the details of that study, but it was never published because we found that chloramphenicol was a super drug to treat them. And this was World War II. We were fighting the Japanese in Malaysia, and we didn't want the Japanese to come to know that their cases of scrub typhus could be saved by giving chloramphenicol. So that article was never published. Also, a physician should publish, and during my career, I published when I could. But I would have always preferred to have published and published more. The next characteristic of a physician is that he needs to be a pioneer sometimes. This may be by serendipity or by design. But if you are a pioneer during your lifetime, then that's a fantastic achievement. Just want to mention that about my discovery of autoimmune thyroiditis in this country. One day I got the Journal of International Medicine, where there was an article on thyroid disease, and it mentioned 4 lines that autoimmune thyroiditis is the commonest cause of thyroid disease in adolescents and young adults in the West. This opened my eyes. We have been always brainwashed to say that iodine deficiency was the cause of goiter in young adults and adolescents. So I phoned up the RC Hospital laboratory, Mr. Priyashant John, and I asked him, Priyashant, can you do the following tests for me? Thyroid autoimmune antibodies, peroxidase, and thyroglobulin antibodies. And can you do all these lab tests that I want in endocrinology? He said, sir, give me 1 month and I'll get back to you. And sharp on 1 month, he gave me a call. Sir, everything is ready. You can now send me your cases. I inquired about the price, and from that day onwards, I started sending samples of serum, which I suspected all patients who presented to my clinic with goiter in young adults, adolescents, and so on. And lo and behold, I found that 35% of the patients with goiter had autoimmune thyroid antibodies. I was fortunate that at the same time, Professor in the Faculty of Pathology had started doing FNACs, and I liaised with her. And we were able to show that there was a correlation between antibody positivity and FNAC cytology in these thyroid patients. And we published them. So sometimes they tell me that I am a pioneer of thyroid autoimmune disease. So most of you will have some opportunity to look out for and to be entirely vigilant at all times to see whether you can pioneer something in medicine. And the last thing I want to tell you is to be proud. Proud that you are a physician. Because to be a physician, you are proud that you have achieved great heights, but also humble at the same time in your approach to other colleagues, your patients, and students. So I wish to leave you with this thought. There are men and classes of men that stand above the common herd. The soldier, the sailor, and the shepherd. Not infrequently. The artist, rarely, and rarely still the clergyman, but invariably the physician, for he is the flower of civilization. Thank you.
Despite gracing his presence through the screen, Dr. Rajaratnam's words were almost tangible, for which I'm sure we are all thankful. Now, may I cordially invite Professor Tilak Jayalat to formally present the chief guest for tonight's event, Professor Saroj Jayasinghe.
Professor Saroj Jayasinghe, MBBS, MD Colombo, MRCP UK, MD Bristol, FRCP London, FCCP, PhD Colombo, and Fellow of the National Academy of Science. He was the 5th Chair Professor of Medicine, University of Colombo, and one of the longest serving consultant physicians at the National Hospital of Colombo, Sri Lanka. Professor Jayasinghe has taught many generations of undergraduates and postgraduates in Sri Lanka and overseas. He is an experienced examiner at the MBBS, MD and MRCP, and supervised and examined several masters and doctorates by research in Sri Lanka and Australia. He was a key figure in the curriculum reforms of the Faculty of Medicine, Colombo, and introduced innovations such as problem-based learning, skills laboratory, and OSCEs. He helped to streamline the teaching of medicine as a discipline and helped to link its teaching at the undergraduate and postgraduate levels to a seamless progression of competencies. He chaired a committee that developed 2016 prospectus for the MD that augmented assessments in communication skills, observed history-taking, and workplace-based assessment. Professor Saroj Jayasinghe.
Thank you very much, Professor Tilak Jayalat. Professor Tilak Jayalat, President, Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine. Guest, Dr. Suranga Manilgama, Conference Chair. Joint Secretaries, members of the Council. Guest of Honor, Senior Consultant Dr. Henry Rajaratnam and President ACP, Dr. Jacqueline Fincher, who are connected to us virtually. Orator, Professor Tilak Veeraratna, Vice Chancellor, Dean of the Faculty of Medicine, senior colleagues, members, guests who are with us physically and virtually. Firstly, let me thank you for honoring me today. I consider it my privilege to be part of this annual conference of the College of Internal Medicine of Sri Lanka. This is a young college with a lot of dynamism. At a time of unprecedented crisis facing the human species around the globe, we as specialists in internal medicine have shown the way forwards to the profession. Thus, the theme, devotion and diligence through courage incomparable, coined by the President, Professor Tilak Jayalat, and the Council this year to celebrate the leadership and actions taken by members of the college during the COVID-19 pandemic. Is there a reason to celebrate? Of course there is. As a nation, Sri Lanka was able to crush the first wave of COVID. This was the wave that devastated Europe and the US, despite all their technologies, forecasts, models, and affluent health systems. If we assume that Sri Lanka had a first wave similar to these countries, by September 2020, we may have surpassed 100,000 cases and thousands of deaths. And there was no vaccine in sight at that time. Recall that this was a time of relative ignorance, with little knowledge on the mechanics of spread of the infection and the importance of masks and physical distancing in prevention. We have compared this excellent performance of Sri Lanka with that of Vietnam and a number of other countries to drive this point home of our success. And I have co-authored a paper which will be coming out in the March issue of the American Journal of Public Health. Unfortunately, we are in the midst of a second wave. In hindsight, that was preventable, but the whole world is on a learning curve. In retrospect, there was complacency on our part, and in the case of COVID, such mistakes were not uncommon. Europe and US, all having millions of deaths too, could have prevented them with hindsight. They all made unbelievable mistakes. Their predictions of human behavior and their outcomes, while they were all wrong, while we relied on swift and sometimes harsh actions based on hardcore epidemiological principles. And that worked. This takes me to another reason to celebrate. And that is how we as a college face the battle against the second wave. We are observing and continuing to witness examples of great devotion to work, strong commitment to patient care, and incomparable courage by the specialists in internal medicine and members of this college. It is they who are facing the brunt of the epidemic all over the country and taking on the responsibility to care for thousands admitted with positive PCR. We salute you, and I dedicate this talk to those who are in the front line. However, we cannot be complacent. The situation could worsen, and we may not be able to withstand the long haul, and there could be other pandemics in future. Such crises have the potential to pose serious ethical dilemmas, empathic distress, and moral injury. All these lead to poor coping styles, physician burnout, and a crisis in confidence amongst the profession. To face these challenges of an uncertain future requires strategies that are different to ones which we are familiar with. Let us use the example of empathy to highlight the necessity of a complementary strategy that we need to consider. The simplest definition of empathy is to be in another's shoes and the ability to feel the emotions of that person. This is not merely feeling sorry for that person, but to understand the difficulties and to mirror the same or similar emotions, now known to be mediated by a network of neurons termed mirror neurons. Research has shown that medical education, especially the clinical environment, diminishes empathy. Several studies using the Jefferson Empathy Scale or similar scales to measure empathy have shown a steady decline of empathy from the time when clinical teaching commences. That's in the third year. This is observed across many health professions. So I think I'm getting the slides on the, yeah. Okay. So this is the definition of empathy. and it's due to mirror neurons, and there is a decline in empathy which is seen especially after the third year, and this has been shown with several studies. I would now like to focus on the area of empathic distress, which is a very interesting concept. It describes the emotional distress one feels when one is in another person's shoes and feels the emotions of that person. I will use a story to illustrate this. It's a story of an intern who struggled to save the life of a 60-year-old male person. The patient, a teacher in a state school, developed acute coronary syndrome and was admitted to the casualty ward. The son of the patient was almost the same age of the intern. For this son, his father was his world. He adored him, and he was his guiding light in life. Without him, he would be lost, both emotionally and at a practical level. Though he was the eldest, he had no means of supporting himself or the education of his siblings financially or at a practical level. To see his father receiving what appears to be a painful set of procedures we call CPR was too much to handle. He became numbed with emotion and then began to sob uncontrollably. When all attempts failed at resuscitation, the task fell on this intern to explain the situation to this particular son of that patient. For the intern, it was too much to handle. The parallels were too close. His father had been his guiding light and continued to be so. The intern too began to cry silently. This was the first patient who died under his watch. He took some time to wipe away his tears before struggling to explain about the death to the grieving son. Imagine you were the intern. Fast forward to 10 or 20 years, depending on your age. Year is 2021. Death of a patient no longer significantly affects your emotion. It has now become one of the many deaths, and you are able to mechanically explain breaking serious news as if you were doing it at the MD exam or the PACERS. This transformation which we go through is partly because we need to survive repeated empathic distress. And this pain which is coming, which we start to experience as an intern, and when you repeatedly get that, you start to have your defense mechanisms working. One way we cope with repeated distress is to become insensitive to it, or worse, is to react to it. This partly explains why, as specialists, we are hurt no more by the innumerable number of deaths around us. Or perhaps more importantly, why a few specialists snap back at innocent patients. They have lost their humaneness and become icy steel, emotionless entities, at least in their professional practice. A few extend this and unfortunately develop traits such as scolding patients, humiliating medical students, and bullying junior staff. In order to prevent this deterioration in empathy, we in the college could explore ways and means of strengthening the humane characteristics of the profession. We have to refocus on enhancing kindness and compassion, rethink of healthcare as a sacred profession, and find our roots of humaneness. And this is something which we might have to face if the COVID epidemic really takes off and we find our own colleagues and family members in the queue waiting for the ventilator. And that will really lead to moral injuries, crises in our confidence, empathic distress, and you name it. And that's why there have been several suicides of frontline staff in the West. Now let me outline a possible strategy to counter this. At an individual level, become self-aware or mindful of your own emotions and foster and promote compassion. It is never too late. This requires us to reconfigure our emotional response from feeling the painful emotions of the other to one of helping others. It's a slight but important shift in the way one handles a situation. Instead of entangling in the painful emotions, one needs to switch to a mode of helping the person in distress. Towards this end, there are several universities, such as Stanford, which have developed courses on compassion. The Faculty of Medicine, Colombo, recognized the importance of compassion several years ago. The Department of Medical Humanities, which was the first such department in Sri Lanka, has developed a program of using narratives to inculcate empathy and compassion. Initially used in the clinical orientation program of the Department of Clinical Medicine, it is now used as an assignment for first and second year students. They visit the hospital in pairs and speak to one selected patient and listens to their life story, more in the form of a novel and not in the conventional medical history. The latter, the medical history which we are so used to, is what we call the medical gaze of a person's life. Whereas the task we expect from the students is a novelist's description of a person's life from childhood. The students write their story in their own mother tongue, and after completing the task, they share this with the whole batch, and selected groups narrate their stories which they have heard. Sharing of these stories is followed by an appreciation of the emotions experienced by the students. The intention is to enable the students to become aware of their empathy and empathic distress, and to guide them towards other forms of coping, such as development of compassion or relief of tension or stress by those encounters. We then describe the neurophysiological basis of the emotions and the scientific basis of empathy and compassion. There are other strategies too. We have sessions on the appreciation of arts, music, poetry, and literature. And Peradeniya is certainly a wealth of resources for such an endeavor. Studies in cognitive science and psychology have repeatedly demonstrated the beneficial effects of humanities, that's the arts, literature, music, poetry, on enhancing humaneness and compassion in health professionals. These observations have been supported by neurophysiology and functional MRIs that demonstrate close links between networks of neurons active during art appreciation and compassion. Regular monthly activities are also planned to highlight the work of eminent persons in society, artists, sports personalities, or a work of art, in order to expose students to a diversity of opinions and expressions of the human condition. So this is just to highlight the different pathways which are being taken in compassion and empathy, and in fact, the networks are distinctly different. At the level of the college, we need to explore these areas and perhaps include them as part of our activities and training. To echo the President's words of wisdom, bringing forth such a transformation to be more humane and resilient will require real courage that is incomparable. I extend my sincere wishes towards the success of deliberations and hope the range of lectures and learning sessions planned by the college will offer deep reflections for revisiting our potential for excellence and humanity as medical professionals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your wise words of wisdom. Always a pleasure. May I cordially invite Professor Tilak Jalat to deliver the token of appreciation to you. The Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine is affiliated to the American College of Physicians. This session is organized in collaboration with the ACP and has been officially sending ambassadors to collaborate this event. The President, Professor Jacqueline Winfield Fincher, has sent her well-wishers from the American College of Physicians, and her address will be broadcasted now.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jacqueline Fincher, President of the American College of Physicians. I bring greetings to all of you at the Sri Lanka Internal Medicine Congress. In our fast-paced, highly technological and specialized world, general internal medicine has never been more important to the holistic and compassionate care of patients. The COVID-19 pandemic has emphasized the critical role of internal medicine physicians throughout the world. It has also emphasized what we here at the American College of Physicians have always known, that internal medicine is truly essential to the health care of all people. The general internist in particular is at the center of a holistic approach to the complete care of the patient. Dr. Francis Peabody, a highly respected internist in the U.S. a century ago, simply stated, "The secret of the care of the patient is in caring for the patient." As a general internist for 32 years in rural Georgia in southeastern part of the U.S., care for the whole patient, body, mind, and spirit has been the joy and purpose of my life. In my holistic approach to practicing general internal medicine, disease is the diagnosis or label we use to put together the patient's signs and symptoms. But illness is the patient's experience of that particular disease. We know a specific disease in any given patient may be experienced very differently for a variety of reasons. As general internists, we are not trained to see a particular organ system in isolation. We are trained to see the patient as a whole. We know problems in one organ system frequently impact the other organ systems and manifest various levels of disease throughout the body, like diabetes, congestive heart failure, or an aggressive cancer. We also know the individual patient brings not just their body to the physician, but they also bring their minds and their spirits that make them fully human beings. With their minds, they bring their educational level, their understanding, their emotional ways of coping or not coping, their family dynamics, and their home environment in which they must manage their disease. Patients also bring their spiritual faith that can also provide strength and insight to their suffering and experience of disease to better manage their chronic diseases or life-threatening illness. The understanding of the emotional and spiritual connection of illness with physical disease is what makes the practice of general internal medicine so fulfilling. It is also the investigative, diagnostic role of the general internal medicine physician that is so critical to healthcare throughout our world. We need internists who can put together all the factors that impact people's health, like their diet, physical activity, genetics, their social determinants of health, with regard to their food supply, environment, housing, and educational level. Other holistic issues involve patients' ways of coping with life stressors, their family structures, work life, and even childhood traumas. And finally, spiritual issues certainly impact the perspective patients have in dealing with health care, and more importantly, the health care for themselves or their family members. It is critical for us to train and, most importantly, value general internal medicine physicians who are able to evaluate the whole person and provide that scientific, holistic, and yet compassionate care of patients. Internal medicine makes the clarion call to not only future physicians, but to those of us physicians on the front lines of healthcare now. We are motivated and, yes, inspired to make a difference wherever we are, to educate, advocate, and lead within our own practices and communities. We are reminded of the power of our own words as internal medicine physicians as we advise our own patients on their health. We are often the voice of reason and calm to our patients as we soften the blows of hard truths, addressing their health problems of obesity or smoking, or breaking the difficult news of a new cancer diagnosis, or bringing understanding to their new diabetes diagnosis. We offer them not only the facts, but compassion and a knowledgeable plan on how to move forward with lifestyle changes, medical treatment, and referral to other physician colleagues if needed. While we are in positions of enormous trust when our patients are at their most vulnerable, we are also in profound positions of influence within our own communities. It is that Hippocratic calling and oath to educate our patients, to bring comfort and healing to them, and to advocate for an evidence-based, equitable healthcare system in all our countries that we so desperately need. Our ethical calling to medicine, with the knowledge and integrity of our medical practice, is what our patients and the public know they can trust. Now, the chaos of the pandemic has certainly provided opportunity for evaluation of our own healthcare systems throughout the world and provides the prospect for innovation and change. Our world reaches out to the calm, professional, reasonable, and rational voice of internal medicine now and will look to us in the future. Each patient, each community, and each healthcare organization needs internal medicine leaders to investigate, diagnose, prevent, and treat the many ills and diseases of our patients and of our societies now and in the future. The best healthcare systems of the world that are built on a primary care foundation that general internal medicine provides are indeed the countries that produce the best overall care for their populations with higher life expectancies, lower burdens of chronic diseases, and do so at lower cost. Excellence and professionalism in the holistic education and training of internal medicine physicians will continue to bring help and healing to our world. Thank you and bless you for all that you do every day to make that possible, one patient and one community at a time. Good day and have a wonderful Congress. Thank you.
May I now invite Dr. Shyamali Abegunawardena to announce the recipient of the awards tonight. And may I also cordially invite the President of the College, Professor Tilak Jalath, to present the awards following her introduction.
Chief guest, Professor Saroj Jayasinghe, President, Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine, Professor Tilak Jayalat, distinguished members of the head table, ladies and gentlemen. It's with great pleasure I announce the recipient of the Most Innovative Service Improvement Award 2020, Dr. Chandana B. Abesinghe, consultant physician, Base Hospital Maravilla, for his innovative project that led to the establishment of a COVID-19 treatment center at Iranavilla. Dr. Abesinghe graduated from the Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo in 1993 with second-class honors and distinction in medicine. He was bestowed the Professor K. Dharmadasa Gold Medal for Clinical Medicine. He obtained his MD in General Medicine from the Postgraduate Institute of Medicine, University of Colombo in 2002, and obtained his post-MD training at the Mater Hospital and John Hunter Hospital, Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia. Since his return to Sri Lanka, he served in the capacity of consultant physician in many parts of the country, including General Hospitals, Chilau and Polonnaruwa, Base Hospitals, Hinguragoda and Dambulla. Currently, he is stationed at Base Hospital Maravilla. Dr. Abesinghe has contributed to system development and service improvement in all hospitals he has served. His contribution in designing and introducing a prescription card for medical clinics in all hospitals he served and establishing high dependency units at base hospitals in Hinguragoda and Dambulla are noteworthy. He also established the intermediate ward for the care of patients suspected to have COVID-19 at Base Hospital Maravilla. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit Sri Lanka, the only facility available to carry out isolated treatment was at the Infectious Disease Hospital in Inauguration. Commencing a new treatment center was a need of the hour. During his tenure at Base Hospital Maravilla, Dr. Abesinghe identified the Center for Voice of America at Iranavilla as a suitable location for conversion to a COVID treatment center. He discussed his proposal with a group of stakeholders on the 19th of March 2020. This ignited a cascade of events which led to the site being handed over to Dr. Abesinghe for it to be converted to a COVID treatment center. The facility was redesigned as an infectious disease treatment center with the contributions from consultant microbiologists, National Hospital Kandy, and a team of architects and engineers from Sri Lanka Army. This process of restructuring led to the establishment of a 60-bedded ward and a 25-bedded intensive care unit dedicated for COVID-19 patients, with manpower support from the Sri Lanka Army. In less than a month's time, the Iranavilla Treatment Center was declared open and it has been accepting patients since the 12th of April 2020. Dr. Abesinghe's timely action has contributed immensely to the hospital-based management of COVID-19 patients in Sri Lanka. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to present Dr. Chandana B. Abesinghe for the Most Innovative Service Improvement Award 2020 for his dedicated service and for the valuable contribution rendered to the community.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam. The official introduction of the Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine online app will happen now. Now to the highlight of the evening, ladies and gentlemen. I kindly invite Professor Thilak Jalath to introduce tonight's orator, Professor T.P. Veeraratne, and to present the medal for the Professor T. Varugunam Memorial Oration.
Thilak Priyantha Veeraratne had his primary education in Richmond College, Galle, and university education at Faculty of Medicine, Peradeniya, and University of Ruhuna. At school, he was the recipient of the Sneath Science Medal for the best performance in advanced level examination at Richmond College in 1981. During his undergraduate career, he had 10 distinctions and 4 gold medals. He was the first in the All Ireland Medical Graduates merit list in 1990 and also the first MD Medicine at the Postgraduate Institute of Medicine, University of Colombo in 1993. His professional career commenced as an intern medical officer at the Professorial Medical and Surgical Unit of National Hospital, Sri Lanka, 1991 to 1992. Soon after the internship, he joined as a lecturer in the Department of Medicine, University of Ruhuna in 1992. He underwent postgraduate training in diabetes and endocrinology in Fremantle Hospital, University of Western Australia, and he was awarded Commonwealth Academic Staff Fellowship to Newcastle Diabetes Centre, UK, 2007. He was promoted as a professor in medicine in 2007 and a senior professor in 2017 on merit. Professor Veeraratne is a fellow of the Ceylon College of Physicians, Royal College of Physicians, Edinburgh, and American College of Physicians. During his academic career, he has held many significant positions. They include President of the Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine in 2019 and Galle Medical Association in 2003. Head of the Department of Medicine, University of Ruhuna from 2007 to 2013, and Chairperson of the Board of Study in Medicine, Faculty of Medicine, University of Ruhuna from 2014 to 2017. Among his contribution to research and dissemination of knowledge As a scholar, he has published 33 research papers in PubMed index journals with 850 citations, and his H index is 11. 6 textbooks for medical undergraduates and postgraduates. He delivered 4 orations, GMA, CCP, and Endocrine Society of Sri Lanka. Being a resource person in 50 national and international meetings as an invited speaker on topics related to diabetes, lipids, and cardiovascular diseases, and supervised 3 PhD candidates at the Faculty of Graduate Studies, University of Ruhuna, Professor Tilak Priyantha Weeraratne.
Good evening to all of you. Thank you, Professor Jailath, my batchmate, for your kind words of introduction. Beloved members of the family of late Professor T. Varagunam, the President and the Council of the Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine, Chief Guest, Professor Saroj Jayasinghe, my supervisor during internship, Guest of Honor who is joining us virtually. At the outset, I would like to thank the President and the Council of the SLCIM for bestowing upon the honor of delivering this year's Professor T. Varagunam oration at the SIMCON 2020. Tonight, we commemorate this oration for this medical colossus in Sri Lanka. Professor T. Varagunam was born in 1930 as the only child to a family whose father was a famous general practitioner in Batticaloa. He had his primary education from Batticaloa. Then he moved to Royal College at the year 6 and completed his advanced level examination and entered to university and completed his medical career with a distinction in medicine and first class. At Royal College, he was known not only for his academic skills, he was a member of the team of Royal who won the Bradby Shield first by Royal. After completing his medical education, he joined the Department of Medicine of newly set Faculty of Medicine at University of Peradeniya as a lecturer. He was given the task of establishing the department as his first academic staff member by then the Vice Chancellor, Professor Nicholas Artigala. This was a time when the young Faculty of Medicine at Peradeniya was being gradually built up, and the Department of Medicine literally had no roof over its head. Dr. Varagunam was given the table and the Department of Physiology without any staff, furniture, or stationery. It is rumored that he brought his father's old typewriter and his own stationery and worked in the department. In 1964, he was promoted as a grade of senior lecturer and lately as a professor of medicine in University of Peradeniya. He continued to be the professor of medicine at University of Peradeniya till 1980, and he joined World Health Organization headquarters in Geneva to be in charge of research training in the newly developed program for research in tropical medicine. He played a key role in establishing the second medical association of Sri Lanka, second to the Sri Lanka Medical Association, Kandy Society of Medicine. His pioneering work not only limited to the clinical sphere, he was also instrumental in setting up the first ever medical education unit in the University of Peradeniya with the help of many eminent personalities known globally for medical education. In late 80s, Sri Lankan government sought his help to establish a medical school in Batticaloa. and he joined there as a chancellor of University of Eastern University, and he served till his death. But he did not forget his place where he started his academic work. He came back to Peradeniya University to start the first ever Medical Alumni Association, PEMSA. Today, I feel humbled and greatly honored to deliver this fourth oration titled, When is Diabetes Diabetes? In the name of a medical colossus in the field of general medicine. The title of this oration may have puzzled you, as it has done many, on the first glance. Be that as it may, I have purposefully, objective of this title was to delve you into the evolving complexities in the diagnosis and classification of diabetes we as physicians face. As physicians, in providing care to patients with diabetes, in resource-poor settings, as everywhere in Sri Lanka, face many difficulties. Many a times, we find it difficult to distinguish the very thin line, which is shifting always between diabetes and non-diabetes, and less often in differentiating the type of diabetes, whether it's type 1, 2, or intermediate. During the next 35 minutes, let me share with you the findings of several hospital and community-based studies to answer the question which I have addressed in this title, When is Diabetes Diabetes? In doing so, I'll be touching on these areas. The first few slides will be on the diagnosis of diabetes on historical perspectives. Next, and the contemporary diagnostic tools for diabetes and the diagnostic utility of glycosylated hemoglobin or HbA1c in different clinical settings in regional studies, and also some experience in differentiating type 1 from type 2 in limited resource setting. Historically, not many diseases have gone back to the BC, before Christ's days, as diabetes. Hypertension has a history of less than 1 or 2 centuries. Coronary artery disease, even less. Diabetes can boast as a disease as one of the longest histories going back to the days of papyrus. The Egyptian manuscripts still preserved in some of the tombs describe diabetes as too great emptying of urine. At the same time, our ancestors from Asia, the Hindu scholars, also have described a mysterious disease causing thirst, enormous urine output, and wasting away the body, with flies and ants attached to the urine of the people. They identified disease as madhumeha, or honey urine. But it is in 1674, a British physician, Thomas Wills in Oxford, noted the sweet flavor of urine. An initial diagnosis of diabetes was based on urine testers and then coming out with the diabetes as a disease. Before 1978, there were many tests were used based on the estimation of glucose either in urine or in blood. In 1979, the first ever generally accepted classification system in the United States published in National Diabetes Data Group. There were numerous etiologically and clinically distinct disorders sharing hyperglycemia were recognized in 1971. In 1997, there's another breakthrough came. Before 1997, the gold standard of diabetes was the oral glucose tolerance test, or OGTT. But they realized, even at 1997, that 25 to 50% of patients with who were diagnosed to have diabetes with oral glucose tolerance test with 2-hour glucose level above 200 had their fasting plasma glucose less than 140. So they were diabetes on OGTT, no diabetes on fasting blood glucose, which is a fairly big discrepancy. You can have a discrepancy with the gold standard with any other test, but having a discrepancy of 25 to 50% in certain areas was something of concern. So there was an attempt to make the 2-hour value of OGTT, which is still considered as a gold standard, an equivalent in the fasting plasma glucose. So they lowered blood glucose to 126 in 1997. So if somebody was born before 1997 with a fasting blood glucose of 126 to 140, he was not considered as a diabetic. And also with that, the terms of insulin-dependent and non-insulin-dependent diabetes were eliminated, and that they were renamed as type 1 and type 2. And there was an intermediate category of impaired fasting glucose introduced. And the basis of this diagnosis was also supported by the presence of long-term complications in individuals in the society. The best evidence for the presence of complications came in the form of retinopathy. National Health and Nutrition Survey conducted periodically in the American population recognized a cutoff of fasting plasma glucose above which individuals in the society develop eye disease called diabetic retinopathy. It was at the area of 120, 130. They also found that the 2-hour value of OGTT was around 180 to 200, and they also found the glycosylated hemoglobin value was about 6. They thought this is the level at which the harmful effects of glucose exerts effects on body. Anything in excess is poisonous and harmful and causes self-destruction, be it money, be it beauty, be it power, and be it glucose. The level at which causes self-destruction is still an enigma. So with 1997 report, and there are some revisions brought in 2003, the currently used diagnostic criteria are defined as symptoms of diabetes with a casual plasma glucose above 200, or fasting plasma glucose above 126, or 2-hour value over 200 in the OGTT. But the first big clinical trial, which is a landmark in the history of diabetes, was the DCCT, Diabetes Control and Complication Trial. They found above the level of HbA1c of 7, the complications of diabetes, almost all, start rising. As you can see, in retinopathy, you have eye disease, kidney disease, nerve disease, and everything goes up when the HbA1c level goes above 7. That led to the researchers to note, why not consider HbA1c also as a diagnostic tool? So in 2009, expert committee recommended glycosylated hemoglobin to be used as a diagnostic tool for diabetes. There were many advantages of taking HbA1c over the other tests used previously like OGTT or fasting plasma glucose. It is a better index which represents the blood glucose over a period of 3 months. And the biologic variability. You can transport HbA1c sample in your blood from a rural hospital to a central hospital without much precautions, unlike in glucose where addition of certain things can make your report variable. So they are stable. There is no need to fasting. And they were not relatively unaffected by recent acute stressors. And at that time, HbA1c was used as a measurement of control in the management of diabetic patients. So you can see, ladies and gentlemen, the diagnosis of diabetes has been evolved over not only centuries, but over many centuries. From urine testing to oral glucose tolerance test, which is a cumbersome test, and fasting glucose to glycosylated hemoglobin. The early criteria were attempted to categorize of people who were at risk of overt clinical symptoms. What is the use if you diagnose diabetes when all the complications have occurred? But the latter, we have realized, to diagnose effectively, you need to make a diagnosis in the people who had the risk of developing diabetes and who would really benefit from any forms of treatment. So, the bottom line of all this says us the correct glycemic threshold that separates normal from diabetes still eludes us. As in the case of many other things in life, the correct threshold of power, of money, of beauty, even intellect still eludes the human race. Let me now take you to my studies which I have been a part in this regard. In the diagnostic utility of the new kid in the block, which is now more than 10 years in the diagnostic field of diabetes, glycosylated hemoglobin, in different clinical settings in the regional studies which I have taken part. And lastly, I will touch on something of the differentiating type 1 and type 2 diabetes in our limited resource setting. The first study is on previously non-diabetic individuals presenting with acute coronary syndromes. Second study is on adults with high diabetes risk. And the third study is a value of HbA1c in community screening for diabetes prevalence. The first study, the objective was to estimate the proportion of patients with no previous history of diabetes admitted to acute coronary syndromes, having normal fasting glucose, impaired fasting glucose, diabetes on fasting glucose, and normal or pre-diabetes or diabetes on glycosylated hemoglobin or HbA1c. We know that when patients with acute coronary syndromes without any previous history of diabetes are brought into the acute setting, we do capillary glucose, and sometimes on the next day we do a fasting glucose. And we exclude the patient's diabetes based on those two. And we do not do a subsequent OGTT in the patients who have a borderline fasting glucose. So the idea was to catch any patients with diabetes on admission with the use of HbA1c to see how useful that is. This is a cross-sectional study in the Universal Medical Unit in the Teaching Hospital Karapitiya. This was conducted by a PGIM post-MD training research component to one of the senior registrars. The calculated minimal sample size was 110 patients with ACS, 125 consecutive admissions with confirmed acute coronary syndromes with no previous history of diabetes were enrolled, and the American Diabetes Association criteria was used to categorize patients into these two groups. And these were the characteristics of the study sample: mean age of 63, BMI of 21, and all fasting glucose mean and fasting, HbA1c 6.5 mean, fairly bit high. And this is the graph and the table which I want you to have a look on. Now, this shows out of the 125 patients, 69 patients were pre-diabetic on HbA1c. 56 patients were diabetic. And to say that every patient admitted with acute coronary syndrome or tell you the heart attack is either have diabetes or pre-diabetes on HbA1c, which on fasting glucose detected only 6 patients as compared to 56. And impaired fasting glucose only 20, whereas 69 with HbA1c. And 99 of the patients were not categorized as diabetes on fasting glucose. We miss a fair number of patients. 75% of the patients with diabetes admitted with acute coronary syndrome because we check only fasting glucose or capillary glucose on admission. And we do not do HbA1c during admission or subsequently. And this is a comparison of patients who have diabetes on glycosylated hemoglobin alone with no diabetes in both tests, to say that patient's body mass index was significantly different when the patient was diagnosed to have diabetes with glycosylated hemoglobin compared with the group which has no diabetes by both tests. So the concluding remarks from this is that every patient admitted with heart attack with no previous history of diabetes on or have either pre-diabetes or diabetes. 50-50 almost. Obese, previously non-diabetic individuals are more likely to be detected to have diabetes with HbA1c. And there were only 6 patients who was diagnosed to have diabetes with fasting plasma glucose, but all these 6 patients have the HbA1c above 6.5. That means these 6 patients, the diabetes is diagnosed not due to stress hyperglycemia. They were having previous diabetes. And we have published this in the Sri Lanka Journal of Diabetes, Endocrinology and Metabolism some time back in 2017. And we are not the only people to research into this area. The prestigious Journal of Diabetes UK, Diabetic Medicine, also published, based on the research in UK, that their experience with checking with HbA1c in all patients with acute coronary syndrome. They suggested that all patients with acute coronary syndrome with borderline HbA1c should undergo OGTT later to confirm their state of glycemia. The second study which I am going to present you is an utility of HbA1c in individuals with high diabetes risk. Those are the first degree relatives of patients with type 2 diabetes. This again was a research component of the MD senior registrar necessary for their board certification. So we all know that first degree relatives of type 2 diabetes have a high diabetes risk, and individuals with borderline fasting blood glucose and high blood risk need OGTT to confirm. And we have no experience in Sri Lankan setting what the optimal cutoff point for HbA1c, even though American Diabetes Association has laid down their cutoff as 6.5. So our aim was to describe the diagnostic utility of and the optimal cutoff of HbA1c for diabetes screening in the first degree relatives of patients with type 2 diabetes patients in regional setting in Sri Lanka. This was a community-based study in Galle district. Calculated minimal sample size was 220, and we managed to collect or enroll 254 previously healthy adults with history of diabetes in their first degree relatives. All underwent fasting plasma glucose, glycosylated hemoglobin, and oral glucose tolerance test. Specifically, they only underwent the 2-hour value. And we drew the ROC curves to find the optimal cutoff of the HbA1c corresponding with the 2-hour OGTT. And these are the characteristics of the study sample, mean age of 50. And results revealed interesting findings. Among the first degree relatives who are not diabetic, 12%, 1/8 of the first degree relative without the history of diabetes had diabetes based on the fasting plasma glucose. When it comes to OGTT, it has to go up because that is the gold standard. It was 16, so 1 in 6. When we use HbA1c, the prevalence went to 27, that is 1 in 4 first degree adult relatives of type 2 diabetes have diabetes on HbA1c. That's fairly big number or big figure. And ROC curve showed that the cutoff point was not 6.5, which is fall in line with the best sensitivity and specificity balance. It was 6.3. And this is the bit of a confusing picture. What you see here, the 3 circles. What in black circle is the highest number with HbA1c, red is the OGTT, purple is the fasting glucose, and the ROC curve. So conclusion was that optimal cutoff value was lower than the recommended value for the Western populations, and HbA1c has a better sensitivity but lower specificity. And if you use HbA1c among the first degree relatives for screening, the prevalence of diabetes will be double. So that is the lesson that we learned from the study 2. And we published this in the diabetes metabolic syndrome clinical research and reviews with these co-authors' help. The third study was a community screening for diabetes prevalence using HbA1c. We know that for community screening, fasting plasma glucose is the most widely used test because it is the most easily done. Not easily, but it is the low-cost test compared to HbA1c, because when you compare the cost, HbA1c test costs 1,800 rupees, whereas the fasting plasma glucose costs about 300, which is a deterrent for community screening. So rather than using HbA1c for each and every patient in the community, we try to identify specific groups of patients who will become diabetes by fasting plasma glucose and HbA1c both. So this community screening in a diabetes in a gold district for a clinical trial, which is a National Research Council funded clinical trial for use of a herbal product with co-acca among the newly diagnosed patients with diabetes. So we needed 147 patients with newly diagnosed diabetes to be used with co-acca therapy with a randomized placebo-controlled clinical trial. So we did a community screening to recruit newly diagnosed patients with diabetes who are not on any lipid-lowering, antihypertensive, or diabetic medications. So we had to screen 1,200 adults in the gold district at different places. We managed to collect 147, and we recruited them for the clinical trial. And all these 147 underwent fasting plasma glucose and also HbA1c. Then we calculated the proportion of patients who had diabetes by both tests. 67 out of 147 had diabetes by both tests. And demographics between the only diabetes with only fasting glucose and diabetes by both tests were compared. And this is the descriptive statistics. And this is the results. What you can see in the center circle is diabetes by both tests, outer in the diabetes by fasting plasma glucose alone. And what you compare in the group 1 is the diabetes by both tests, group 2 is the diabetes by only fasting plasma glucose. What you can see is when the patient is obese with a higher BMI or higher waist circumference, they tend to have a diabetes by both tests. And when we did a regression analysis to find out the odds ratios of the chances of odds of having diabetes by both tests, we found only the higher BMIs and the diabetes among the first degree relatives were present among patients who are likely to be diabetes by both tests. So conclusion of that was community dwelling adults with higher BMI and first degree relatives with relatives of type 2 diabetic patients have significantly high odds of having diabetes by both tests. So rather than using HbA1c for each and every patient in the community, we might use in our resource poor setting those with first degree relatives and with higher BMI for screening. And we published this article in the Journal of Nutrition and Metabolism last year. So what we have learned from these 3 regional studies is that the diagnostic cutoff is not as 6.5, it is lower than 6.5. This has to be validated in Sri Lankan studies, of course. And prevalence of diabetes will be doubled, and we should be prepared to handle that burden among the first degree relatives. But still, even resource poor setting, patients might benefit if we at least do HbA1c on hospital admission each and every with acute coronary syndrome, or we encourage the first degree relative adults to undergo HbA1c test, and those with obese to undergo HbA1c, because we hardly do OGTTs nowadays. The last research was focused on quite a different topic: differentiating type 1 from type 2 diabetes in resource poor setting. In 1997, expert committee by the American Diabetes Association had this very important statement: assigning a name to someone's type of diabetes is not as important as understanding and treating their particular pathogenesis. That is, of course, is not peculiar to any disease. We have given nice names to most of the disease. Unfortunately, we understand little and hardly treat many of them. We only have the nice name, of course, with someone's help. Be that as it may again, Before 1979, most of the people thought diabetes is a single disease entity. But lately, with the 1997 classification, the type 1 and type 2 differentiation was defined. There are two different diseases according to 1997. But we have found after 1997, these two diseases are not as clearly separated as it thought to be. There are types which have features of type 1 and type 2. We don't know where to put them in if we really use type 1 and type 2 classification. If you go by the clinical features of the major types, we know that younger the patient, more likely to be type 1. When symptoms of hyperglycemia is there, more likely to be type 1. When there's a lean body mass, more likely to be type 1. And there are autoimmune markers, and there's absolute insulin deficiency, which is shown by the absent or poor C-peptide response. They are type 1. Is it so always? There are problems. 10% of elderly now we diagnose with type 1. Don't be surprised if you find a 75-year-old man coming for the first time have type 1 diabetes, whether you have given all the medicine, oral hypoglycemic. Within 1 month, he will die of ketosis because you have overlooked the fact that it is type 1. We have loaded him with all the available 5 OHAs. After about 1 month later, he will die of severe ketosis. And many of the obese patients are now type 1, even though we thought leaner the patient, the type 1 is the diagnosis. And weight loss occurs in some patients type 2. And there are other reasons why this type 1 and type 2 classification is not very clear-cut. For example, take this patient, 75-year-old lean male, presented with loss of weight and found to have blood glucose 350 with no ketones, and initially respond to metformin and glycoside, and he might go on for a few months. He might disappear. You thought that he would stop all his medication. No. If he's type 2, he will survive for a few years. If it is LADA, or latent autoimmune diabetes in adulthood, he will end up with severe hyperglycemia sooner. If it is type 1 in a honeymoon phase, he will die either with ketosis in a regional hospital where they were not able to make a diagnosis of ketosis because they will not suspect because somebody who has responded to oral hypoglycemic for a couple of months. So we don't know what the type of this patient is. So there are tools to diagnose type 1 and type 2 at the resource full setting. They have autoantibodies, they have islet cell antibodies, they have C-peptide. Can't we use this battery of these tests? Yes, we can, but this is the cost. If you use all these three batteries, it will cost about 20,000 rupees per patient for the initial battery when a young patient comes to you with a typical type 1 phenotype. So, will he be able to cost this bill? So, because of this, we thought of assessing the value of simple clinical and biochemical parameters to recognize insulin requiring diabetes early. So this study was a prospective observational study, a cohort of 106 individuals with clinical diagnosis of type 2 diabetes before the age of 40 years. There were almost equal number of male and females with a mean age of 32, and they were followed up for 2 years. In the sense, all patients who presented to our clinic less than 40 years were enrolled and followed up until they require insulin with the use of all the oral hypoglycemic agents. And we noted their age and body mass index and prevalence of metabolic syndrome on admission and a surrogate marker of insulin resistance. This triglyceride to HDL ratio more than 3 has been regarded as a surrogate marker of insulin resistance in the lipid profile. With insulin resistance, your triglyceride goes up, HDL goes down. As a result, the ratio between the TG to HDL goes up. So higher the TG to HDL ratio, the more the chances of insulin resistance existent in a patient. It has been shown and validated in several studies. And we also noted the changes because these patients were under our follow-up. And when they needed insulin, when all the available oral hypoglycemics were used in the maximal amount and the patients were very compliant with medications, when we needed insulin, we checked whether they are insulin deficient by giving C-peptide and giving glucagon and assessing their C-peptide. That is an accepted way of assessing the pancreatic beta cell C-peptide reserve. Rather than checking the C-peptide fasting level alone, you tax the pancreatic cells with glucagon and you see what the response is. Similar to any other challenge test that we do when we suspect a deficiency state in endocrine scenario. This is what we found. Out of the 106, 12 needed insulin within the 2 years. That is about 11 patients. And we compared the patients needing insulin and not needing insulin within 2 years. We found younger the patients, significantly higher the chance of needing insulin statistically. Leaner the patients, same. When no metabolic syndrome is present at the time of diagnosis, it is more likely to be type 1 or early insulin requiring. When they continue to lose weight despite your treatment, they are likely to need insulin in a shorter time. And where insulin resistance index is absent, they are more likely to be insulin requiring within 2 years. So individuals presenting clinically as type 2 diabetes, or phenotypically as type 2 diabetes at a younger age with lean body mass, without metabolic syndrome, who loses continuously weight over the 2 years. If you have seen diabetic patients who are responding, whatever you expect with the patients to lose weight, weight gain is a form of response to your therapy in diabetes. If they are continuously losing weight, that is a sign that they are not responding, where very soon he will require insulin. So the clinical triad of absent metabolic syndrome and the 3G to HDL ratio less than 3 and the lean body mass, these 3 things which you can check on admission, was present in 11 out of 12 patients who required diabetes within 2 years. So our conclusions was these simple markers are of use in limited resource setting in recognizing patients who require insulin, because these patients need to be managed specifically, not as type 2. If you manage them once in 3 months, once a month or so at a peripheral level, they might end up with ketosis and die, because we know what sort of resources are available in the peripheries at the GPs to manage patients with ketosis. And we have published this in a Asian Diabetes Conference in 2006. This is fairly old study, but it's valid not only today, even 20 years to come, as an abstract and published in Diabetic Medicine in the abstract book. So let me summarize the findings, all these in 3 to 4 slides. Evaluation of testing of diabetes have come from urine to HbA1c. We don't know what to come. If you read about new diagnostic ways of diabetes, now there are ways of flashing a torch to your eye and making a diagnosis, because there's a different types of fluorescence from your eye coming in among patients with diabetes in the cornea. So you can flash a torch to your cornea and see whether you have a risk or you have a diabetes in years to come. Whatever it is, attempts to make the diagnosis of diabetes by recognizing the harmful threshold still is eluding to us. And every adult with no previous diagnosed diabetes present with heart attack has either diabetes or no diabetes. So you can't really go against a cardiologist who believe that diabetes is a cardiovascular disease. So everybody who develops a heart attack have either diabetes or pre-diabetes. So, but still we hang on with diabetics with internal medicine. But we can do one thing. We should make HbA1c mandatory in all patients with heart attack who do not have diabetes, to see whether they have pre-diabetes or diabetes. That is something that we can do. An HbA1c test of cutoff of 6.3 and acceptable sensitivity and specificity about 80%. So we don't have to do OGTT among the first degree relatives to see whether they have diabetes. HbA1c is as good as OGTT among this high-risk population. That is the lesson that you learned from our regional study. And the clinical triad of these 3, being non-obese, having a TG to HDL ratio less than 3 and absent metabolic syndrome says that your patient with diabetes is very likely to require insulin within 2 years. And that is a special category, not type 2, not type 1 either. So we should follow these patients in a different way. Ladies and gentlemen, I have come to the end of my presentation. Before I wind up, I would wind up with these words. I believe the word was must be the best word in the English language. It tells you everything you need to know about your ingenuity and compassion as a species. If you look at the smallpox today, if you read about or look up smallpox today, often the first 3 words of the definition you will read is smallpox was a disease. If everything goes well, as we mature as a species, the word was will propagate steadily throughout our encyclopedias. And perhaps centuries from today, students of medicine will read in their books about forgotten disease called diabetes, written in the wonderful past tense, diabetes was a disease. But until that day arrives, I believe it is our duty to find not only the answers to the questions we have, but always question the answers we frame. That is why I have left you with few questions at the end of each of these summarized slides. And I believe the bigger the circle of the known is, the greater the contact of the unknown will always be. Before I wind up, I would like to keep this thought in your mind as well. The research that we have done is to see what everybody else has seen and to think what nobody else has thought. With that, I will wind up, and it is my duty to thank several, but in the want of time, I would like to thank all the co-authors of the research papers we have written and the participants and Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine, and not the least, all of you who have come avoid this COVID pandemic to witness and hear and get your share with this oration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. As we wind down the proceedings of the evening, it is now time to speak a few words of appreciation to all who have made this event a success. May I please invite Professor Manoji Pathirage, Secretary to the Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine, to propose the vote of thanks.
A very good evening. Professor Saroj Jayasinghe, the chief guest, Dr. Henry Rajaratnam, the guest of honor, Professor Jacqueline Fincher, the ACP president, Professor Asiri Abbegunawardena, the Dean, Faculty of Medicine, Professor Tilak Veeraratna, the orator, Professor Tilak Jayalath, the president of the Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine, Dr. Suranga Manilgama, the Congress chairman, members of the Council of Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine, past presidents of Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine, distinguished members of Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. This glittering event marks the inauguration of the 4th Annual Congress of Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine on the theme of devotion and diligence through courage incomparable. The Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine, since its inception 5 years ago, has achieved many milestones that decorate this special evening of our college in this historic city of Kandy. I'm sure the unfolding events from now onwards would help you to recall the nostalgic memories of our blissful youth 5 years ago. Memory will unfold the hindrance what we faced to pave the way to heights we have reached in our college today. So, My sincere hope is that today will also be remembered as a milestone in the annals of the Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine. Successive annual Congress of Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine have brought our members from all corners of the island together to renew memories and share experiences despite COVID-19 pandemic. Keeping with the tradition, the organizing committee has worked tirelessly to make our dream a reality under the able leadership of Professor Tilak Jayalat, the incumbent president, and Dr. Suranga Manilgama, the Congress chairman of the Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine. Now, let me move to the duty assigned to me by the organizing committee. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my hearty and bounden duty to thank everybody who helped us to make this event a success, and I deem it's a great privilege to propose the vote of thanks at the conclusion of this inaugural ceremony. At the very outset, I would like to express my sincere thanks to Professor Saroj Jayasinghe for accepting our invitation to be the chief guest and delivering a thought-provoking speech. Thank you very much, sir, for coming all the way from Colombo with your family to grace this occasion. We are, in fact, greatly honored by your gracious presence this evening. Then, I wish to thank Dr. Henry Rajaratnam, the senior physician who joined us virtually as the guest of honor. Further, my heartfelt thanks go to Professor Jacqueline Fincher, the ACP president, also joined us virtually. Then I wish to thank Professor Asiri Abbegunawardena, the Dean, Faculty of Medicine, for his presence today, despite his busy schedule. Next, I wish to thank Professor Tilak Weeraratne, the orator of Professor T. Varaganam Memorial Oration, for elaborating on when diabetes, unraveling diagnostic dilemmas in limited resource setting, a timely topic that is very much applicable to today's society. Thank you very much, sir. I wish to pay my tribute to the members of the Council and the Executive Committee for their generous guidance, support, and commitment to make this event possible. You are the pillars of strength that sustain the structure of Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine during our tenure, and organizing this fourth annual Congress successfully was due to your help. Editorial and scientific committees took an enormous amount of responsibility in formulating the formidable academic program and wide array of editorial and printing work, which was the icing of the cake. My heartfelt gratitude goes out to all my colleagues in these committees. Activity of this magnitude is not possible without the help of many more individuals who are too numerous to mention by the names. I appreciate your kind assistance. I wish to thank Dr. Anjali for excellent comparing at this inaugural ceremony. Moreover, I have a very special thank to Dr. Anura Rajapaksha, the Chief Medical Officer of Kandy Municipality Council, and Dr. Pasan Jayasinghe, the Regional Epidemiologist, for allowing us to proceed with this annual Congress despite the prevailing COVID-19 situation of the country. Thank you very much, and we promise to strictly abide the national rules and regulations. Further, I wish to thank Mr. Thusit and the team from Hotel Grand Canyon for hosting the Congress during this COVID pandemic. No doubt that latest technology plays a leading role in the best delivery of scientific sessions. In that regard, I wish to thank Mrs. Delisha and the team from Asia Tours for the provision of IT facilities and organizing the event glamorously. An event of this magnitude would not have been a reality without the generous financial support. So I would like to thank all our sponsors for their kind help. I wish to thank all resource persons of pre-Congress workshops, scientific session, and the chairpersons and moderators. Please pardon me for not being able to mention everybody's by name. I wish to thank Ms. Tharushi for her secretarial assistance, Netwin Printers, AMP Print Shop, and Tallis Advertising Limited for printing assistance, Mr. Amal Ranavaka for photography, Mr. Dishan Fernando for artwork, Mr. Indika Bandara and the Shades of Vanamal for floral arrangements. Further, I wish to thank Dr. Udeni Dasanayaka, Dr. Prabhashini Kumarihami, and Dr. Sujiva Gunaratna for their help during this inauguration ceremony. The members are the strength of Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine. You came here from many far away destinations. Thank you very much for your participation. I, on behalf of the Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine fraternity, wish to extend a big thank you to all the guests in this august audience for being here this evening. Finally, I wish to thank Professor Tilak Jailat, the President of the Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine, for his excellent leadership, and Dr. Suranga Manilgama, the Congress Chair, for arranging the excellent scientific program. Both of you have been a constant inspiration for all the activities of the 4th Annual Congress. It is my heartiest wish is that the proceedings of the days will offer you an opportunity to share knowledge and to establish the fellowship. Let's look forward to setting off a fruitful and productive Congress with a lot of sweet memories. Good night.
Thank you, Madam. That brings us to the end of tonight's event. Ladies and gentlemen, may I kindly request you to stand once again for the procession to leave the hall. For being a part of this memorable event. May I invite you all to join for cocktails which will be served downstairs. Please enjoy the evening.